In the same breath, the SACP says the president is acting as mandated by the structures of the governing party.
It's not a presidentialized organization. It's an organization on collectives. So you have national officials, you have National Working Committee, and you have the National Executive Committee. In the ANC processes, there's nowhere where the president is expected to act with a prerogative, because in the ANC constitutional structures, prerogatives of government do not exist in the ANC. So the president is acting as part of national officials and as mandated by the NWC and as part of the National Working Committee.
And Sango in the province says the intervention by President Ramaphosa is not a factional move, as some have claimed.
I want to correct an impression that the intervention, Section 100 intervention, is a factional move. I want to correct that on the basis that if you look at all the processes that were engaged upon, the technical task team that actually generated a report, but over and above that, particularly in response to the PA, I want to clarify one thing, that the ATC, in terms of the legislature resolutions, keeps the records of all decisions that are made in government, and therefore you should understand it better that the ATC, in terms of what has been resolved in various legislature committees, has got enough report to demonstrate the extent to which there's a collapse of government in the Northwest.
I think this whole political gesture is unprecedented. Post-1994, you will remember that a while ago, the government of Limpopo was also under administration. But there were only about 5 provincial departments that fell under the direct control of national government. In this instance, the entire province, as you just rightly pointed out, will now have to account, and basically all their actions will have to be sanctioned by the executive, in this instance the cabinet. It goes to show somewhere that there might be overwhelming evidence of a collapse of the provincial government. And I suspect the executive, together with the president, saw it fit that they should take control of the province in relation to issues of governance, and then of course in relation to issues of service delivery.
Now joining us in studio on this very conversation is Professor Sipho Siepe, political analyst. We're also joined on the phone line by Lake Khabi from the Revolutionary Council. He happens to be their spokesperson. Gentlemen, thank you for your time. Welcome to the both of you. Professor, perhaps to start with you. We're all familiar with the placing under administration of departments. In this instance, we've got an entire province, although it seems that there's serious financial impropriety. But what is your take nevertheless?
Well, we must start first with the Constitution, which is a clear cut. What the Constitution does indicate is that we have obligations that must be fulfilled by provinces in the same way as the national government has its own obligations. And one of the obligations is of the national executive is that if it comes to their attention that the province is failing to execute its obligations in terms of legislation and the Constitution, the national executive can intervene. And that what it does is also to spell out the nature of and how the thing should be approached. That first, you would have a situation where you have what I may call a soft intervention, where the national executive can point out to the province to say, we have made this determination that you are reluctant to fulfill these obligations, and we direct you to do so. And so it will issue a directive and indicate what needs to be done. So that is section 100A, yes. 1A. Then there is also section 101B. That one is what you may call a hard intervention, in a sense that the national executive then assumes responsibility for those functions. But that intervention is often supposed to be temporary, but it is really about making sure that those services and those obligations are complied and are delivered. So only when it is satisfied will it pull out, because that's another sphere of government. But the Constitution empowers the national executive to do that. But there must be, obviously, in our Constitution, we also believe in fairness. So there must be evidence of a collapse. What we know and have seen, at least in the Northwest, we've seen the collapse of the Department of Health.
Yes.
And it is also possible, because we have not seen the interministerial committee's report, task team's report, which I also think was also proper for the national executive or the president to say, let us have an interministerial task team to go and assess before we can make a decision.
Extent of the problem.
Yeah, so that really speaks more to what the Constitution provides. But then there's also the issue of the politics, in terms of how do you handle this in such a way that you also build confidence in the process that you undertake, that you are also not seen to be factional or to be paging the people that you may not agree with. So there is the administrative, and the government cannot shy away from that responsibility of making sure that there's stability, there's territorial integrity, there's integrity in terms of our economy. And this is why, on that part, you could actually say the national government has tried to play by the book.
Mm-hmm. And then in this instance, would you say they've invoked then Section 100B?
Well, actually, this is also a very important consideration, because when you look at the letter that Minister Dlamini Zuma has actually written to the acting premier, it actually states that that has not been determined fully. What they have said is that we put it under administration, but ministers who have equivalent portfolios at the provincial level will have to assess whether they are going to invoke, whether what needs to be invoked is Section 100A or Section 100B. So it depends on the nature and the extent to which departments are complying with the obligations. Mm-hmm. So there may be some departments that have so collapsed completely, and there may be departments that may simply need a directive to say, what we are asking you to do is that these are the shortcomings, and you will need to take these remedial actions. But in those instances where the national executive is convinced that nothing short of invoking Section 101B, where there's an assumption of responsibility by the national executive, then it will go that route.
Mm-hmm. Perhaps to bring in Professor Shedrack Guto, who now also joins us on the phone line. Professor, thank you very much for your time. Your take on the decision by government to place the whole province under administration?
Well, I think, first of all, we have to indicate here that we are dealing with not just the section under 100. We are also dealing with Chapter 3 of the Constitution, which deals with cooperative governance, and which also require that various spheres of government really do not conflict each other and go to the courts of law in the country. But at the moment, we have a situation which is also provided for in the Constitution under Section 100. And there are two portions of that. One is under Section 100 and A, 101A, you can be able to have the national sphere intervene in the provincial matters and administer them. Section 101B, where really the national sphere of government can take over the administration or functions of the National Assembly. And I think that's where we are at the moment. And it is quite difficult because we are dealing here with these three spheres of government, and the national now comes to administer the provincial. And in administering the provincial, it means that the provincial administration no longer functions. It is the national that's going to run those, and the national has to decide on which areas it is going to administer. And I think that at the moment we are dealing with a situation where it is administration of the whole of the provincial government area.
Now, Professor, I understand that you have also added that cautionary voice to say you cannot invoke this section arbitrarily, that you've got to show serious reason. Why that statement, that they need to somehow be cautious, not to just invoke it arbitrarily?
Yes, it is because I think the national government at the moment has decided that provincial government is dysfunctional because the premier is no longer, the provincial premier is no longer really functioning. And the persons who are operating under the provincial government cannot function. So the national government will have to decide whether or not the administrator or the general administrator is really going to have some of the provincial MECs are going to function or not. So there's still a room open to really say what is going to continue to function and what is not. But what we know at the moment, or what we have to admit at the moment, is that the premier has no function any longer in the province.
Lake Khabi, I take it as the Revolutionary Council, you're pretty much satisfied with the decision?
Good evening, and let me hear Professor Guto, but I think as time goes on, you'll be able to explain as to what he's saying. With regards to the action taken by the cabinet, we welcome the action. It vindicates us because we've been saying throughout that government in the Northwest has collapsed, and therefore intervention and was needed. But we want to go on to say, with the gravity of the situation, the NCOP should fast-track the process of engaging with the matter, but ultimately come to a point where Section 101B becomes effective, and so that we are able to restore governance in the Northwest. What makes us more happy is that the piggy bank has been taken away from the dirty hands. We're hoping that moving forward, restoration of good governance will take place, and then our people will receive the necessary services that they so need.
Now, we understand that ANC members in the Northwest, some of them are calling for your immediate suspension, but there's also another twist where we saw a revised list of MPLs. So there's a lot happening in the province. What's your take there on that decision?
Well, there's a lot happening in the province. There's a lot of confusion happening in the province. For those who are calling for suspension and discipline, it will then mean freedom of expression and free political activity is no longer allowed in the province, I've been saying. One of the reasons why a platform that, like the Revolutionary Council, was created was on the basis that within the structures of the ANC, it is impossible for a dissenting view to be heard. So that's why this platform. But if those who feel that we need to be disciplined, we'll subject ourselves to the processes of the ANC, but we will prove in those processes that the ANC does not exist. in the province. But also, with what has been happening in the province, it is so intriguing that on the 8th, just a day before the premier was to resign, a list was revised. So it's a clear indication of desperation by those who are leading the organization in the province, but also wanting to create confusion as they have created. So it also cements and our argument that the ANC does not exist in the province. We just have a group of confused people who do not know exactly what should happen and what they are doing.
Now, Lucky, I don't know, what did you make of Supra's statement that there are problems within the ANC, but somehow they are finding expression in the EFF? He said that clearly there were those that were colluding with the economic freedom fighters. Or do you believe, as ANC members, that we shouldn't worry about who we team up with if the end result is good governance? People should stop playing party politics if the interests of ordinary people are somehow could be compromised in this instance.
Well, there has been that sickness in the province, especially under the leadership of the Honorable Mahuma Bello, that we fail to look at the issues as they are raised. Rather, we look at who is raising the issues and start casting aspersions on those people raising those issues. I don't think there's any coalition or cooperation with the opposition in the province. What ANC members are doing are putting into practice resolutions of the 54th National Conference, as was held in Nasrec, to say one of the key issues that we need to start tackling is issues of corruption. And it is members of the ANC who are supposed to be leading in the fight against corruption, but also restoration of good governance. So it's in nature of the leadership of the ANC that we have that as and when issues are raised, they rather look at who is talking and wanting to start looking at other things which do not exist. There is no cooperation or coalition with the opposition or the EFF. It's issues raised by the communities which are supposed to be led by the ANC members. And the ANC members are doing exactly that to say, you are there leading the government that cannot respond to issues as raised by the communities. Now, as members who are outside government are going to assist you to make sure that the ANC leads and leads properly.
Professor Lucky is insisting or stressing that there is no cooperation with the EFF in particular. But that on its own, is it not a problem to a certain extent that politicians would not want to collaborate with their political opponents? Because we think politicians generally are leaders of society. So you all have to be pushing for good governance. What's wrong with collaborating?
Well, I think we've reached a situation that is unfortunate, where the pursuance of that which is right is not a common denominator. What you see within parties is that they've become almost obsessed with outstaging each other. And I think Supra Mahomapele is also correct that there is something wrong with the ANC, because if you look at the provincial representation, you have a large number of members of the ANC. And if the ANC wants to remove him, the ANC should be able to do that. But the mere fact that it has to rely on the opposition party to do that, it means that there is actually a problem within the ANC. So effectively, if Supra is such a bad person, the ANC should have processes that it can invoke internally to be able to deal with that. So what it means that it has actually failed to do so, hence it relies on the opposition parties. But I do think that we need to elevate our politics to where that which is in the interest of our people becomes almost supreme, because when we say we are a democracy and where the governors and the governed get along, it's when those who are governed see that their interest is being addressed. So that's the first thing. Then the second issue is what is raised by Professor Guto, the issue of ensuring that in the application of whatever we do, it should not be arbitrary. There must be some objectivity, even though there will always be an element of subjectivity. For instance, the people that you had actually called, the SACP and all that, yes, they agree that Super must go. But we cannot mislead ourselves to saying he does not have support. The mere fact that he had remained all these years in that position despite the major allegations that have been made against him indicates that he's somebody who enjoys a particular support. This is why the ANC, in its wisdom, had decided to say this matter is not going to be handled by brute force. It will be a matter where persuasion becomes key, and also to suggest that there must also be evidence-based, and hence the deployment of interministerial to simply say go out there and make an assessment to assist us. And I think it is also probably because the main aim is not to deal, or should not be to deal with a particular person. It should also be about, fundamentally, about restoration of stability and economic unity, but also making sure that you also respond to the concerns that people had actually raised. So the debate really among members of the ANC is whether this, how do you make sure that it's not seen, as some people are beginning to see it, as a factional, as opposed to, because they are...
But we had the chair of SCOPA saying that they raised some of these issues, that you had wasteful expenditure to the tune of 16 billion. They raised this in August before NASREC. Yeah, so is that not opportunistic as well, that you've got people that will shout NASREC and purging of certain people, if perhaps in the province it was raised earlier than that?
Well, what it means is that there is a failure of the ANC itself to deal with those issues. Once you have this, I mean, because you don't think that the Auditor General will just choose to create figures that are not there. So these reports of lack of accountability are there. But why do you have to wait until there are protests, until there's looting, until there's violence? Because once that happens, first of all, it happens because you had failed to respond to those. But at the same time, we should also be careful about where people start thinking that the only way that you can remove somebody is to go and loot, because then anybody can rent the crowd. And we've actually seen people spending money for protest, and we need to deal with this carefully. That's why I think the approach that has been adopted of saying, let us look at the facts, and on the basis of the facts, move towards assistance. And I think the language that you find also from the National Executive, it's a language of restoration. It's not about the getting back at some people. It's about saying, also even the approach is to say which departments need far greater assistance, which ones didn't require. So I think it's much more sober than what we see outside. One sometimes must read what the Interministerial Committee is saying to its members. But I do think that the approach of the ANC is also to make sure that in the end, there is a defensible case to be made, and there's unity within the ANC, especially given that the next year you're also going to have national elections. You do not want to have a limping ANC that is going to prepare itself for elections.
No, it remains a very interesting case that we will be following the Northwest, all of those developments there. Gentlemen, thank you for your time, all three of you. More news and updates on the other side of this break.